Ja Morant's going to be in the headlines soon whenever Adam Silver decides to announce the punishment that is forthcoming, and we accept it to be we expect it to be steep. I don't know if we will accept it for whatever it ends up being based on the number of games, because that's going to be the large debate here, is what's acceptable versus what is looked at similar. It won't be similar to the last suspension. 8 games was a breeze, and as was the drive-through counseling session he took in Florida. But I don't know what would be viewed as light versus heavy-handed. I think they should just come forward with a suspended indefinitely. Do it the way the NFL would handle a player betting on the game. Suspended indefinitely. And or the way the NBA, the NFL would handle a similar situation where the indefinite suspension doesn't mean a season. It doesn't mean it has to be half a season. It just means there are parameters set forth that must be, you have to stay within the parameters, the guidelines, the boundaries. And not 2 months later, after you have a meeting face-to-face with the commissioner, a similar situation arise. That, to me, is more important than just a number of games. I actually want to see him do well. And in order to get back into the league, if he really wants it, I think the NBA should just lay out an indefinite suspension where we will monitor to make sure that everything's going in the favor of Ja Morant and in the favor of him rejoining the league. Because that's what needs to happen. He needs to find some help.
Yeah, I mean, I think both's possible, where you could say punishment or suspension no shorter than 40 games with stipulations to return.
At that time, we will review.
It needs to be a half a season. Look, I hope Ja Morant gets the help that he needs. The NBA can mandate some of that, and hopefully all of that works. But Ja Morant's got to feel like he needs help first. And I've not seen any evidence that that is the case with Ja Morant. And it is not the NBA's responsibility to rehabilitate him. It is the NBA's responsibility to look out for the NBA. And if Ja Morant wants to continue to make that max contract money he signed with the Grizzlies, he will have to adhere to the NBA's policies. Now, to not be completely heartless and not be disingenuous, the NBA should set out their policies to be something along the lines of it's not court ordered because he hasn't been arrested for anything, but league ordered therapy. There needs to be probably some community service involving gun violence or whatever you want to call it. There needs to be some of that happens with Ja Morant for him to get back to playing in the NBA. But I just don't see this as the NBA has to rehabilitate Ja Morant. The NBA needs to not look two-faced in their efforts to make sure that Ja Morant sees that he should make better decisions. But ultimately, this is on Ja Morant and who he has around him to do the right thing, to get better when it comes to this, and to get back to dominating. Because this guy is a great talent if he can play.
It is about how Ja Morant wants to approach this. But you better believe it's about the NBA whenever if they're going to allow him back in the league, to make sure that he's worthy of being back in the league based on what Adam Silver feels like is representable when you have an investigation not just involving Ja Morant, but the Indiana Pacers. It's more than just one player involved in the totality of it. This is not waving a gun in the passenger seat. This is everything involved. This is the manager down at the Foot Locker. Ja Morant represents the NBA while doing that. And what they can't just do is just move him aside and just continue forward and not expect for that to continue to happen. They've got to make sure if he's going to be back in the league at some point, and I think we all agree he will be, they're going to let him play again at some point, that he's more reliable than 2 months down the path of letting him back in or having a conversation where you're backing him to where you're back in the headlines doing the exact same thing again. And maybe that happens again. But what they can't let happen is for this to bleed over into something much more serious. And that's the path that we're on currently. They've got to derail and get a different direction going from what they're doing right now and how they've approached his discipline. And I think the only way to do that is to do the indefinite suspension and then allow him to show you whether or not he's on that path, instead of just waiting a couple of weeks and then saying, all right, let's try this again, which is what they did last time. And instead of a couple of weeks, it'd be a couple of months, and then we'll try this again. I think they have to be much more involved than just simply saying, bring us back a signed signature from your doctor.
Yeah, and I'm separating the Foot Locker or mall incident with the mom where he threatened the manager at the shoe store, and I'm separating that and the pickup basketball game at his house with a teenager punch and threats. I'm taking that out of the NBA equation.
They have to consider that, though.
They do, but I'm saying just for the Ja Morant defender out there,
yes,
and there's plenty of them. That's like, what has he done? It's illegal, These Republican representatives pose with guns, and 3 strikes already. Okay, and I'm taking those 2 out. From an NBA perspective, the guy was investigated for him and his crew putting a laser pointer on a gun, pointing it at another NBA team's bus. That's 1. The fact it had to be investigated, huge strike. 2, on a road trip to Denver, he's seen in a strip club with a gun after the laser pointer incident. And 3 was the latest Instagram Live video with the gun. So for those that are saying, oh, well, half a season or a season sounds like it's too much, and I say he's already had 3 strikes. The next one will be a 4th. I could see some sort of, to go along with you have to meet these criteria to return after a half a season or a season, some level of probation from the league that if any gun-related incident happens in the next season and a half, you are kicked out of the league.
But also, they've given for the those that are saying like, hey, what's he done that's illegal? JJ Redick has said this. He's already been handed the benefit of the doubt, even though I think like if this were a civil trial, and it's not a criminal case, but if this were a civil trial, it would be more reasonable than not, is the conclusion you have to come with. 51% to 49%. Well, the NBA came back after the Denver gun incident in the club and said, well, we couldn't prove that he brought this on the flight, that it was on a team bus, that it was his gun. He has a legal carry permit. It's not illegal to have it there based on that permit. And we couldn't prove that anything was taking place on NBA property, which includes the plane, traveling with it, and the team bus and the team hotel. But if this were a civil trial, wouldn't we say it's more reasonable than not that that was his? Of
course.
And it was taken to those NBA quote-unquote properties. So the benefit of the doubt, the benefit of the doubt was an 8-game suspension for that, and knowing that if this happens, it's like Chad, we looked it up, it's like a 50-game suspension, automatic, if that takes place on the team flight or on the bus. And guess what happened after the benefit of the doubt was given? They changed their travel policy, where they're not going to stay over an extra night in the popular cities.
In hindsight, too, Hutton, that 8-game suspension seems really light. At the time, I remember thinking, okay, that feels about right, and then he'll be back in time for the playoffs. That felt okay. But now if you see this other thing happen, it all feels way too light. Why? Because he immediately violated the trust of Adam Silver and the NBA after meeting with him after this latest incident so quickly. Mm-hmm. So now it felt like, well, that wasn't enough because that didn't get through to him. What will get through to him? And I do think it's a combo of at least half a season suspension. That is, I like the idea of making it indefinite to an extent. And you have to do this, and this before you're allowed to play again.
The other thing is, going along with this benefit of the doubt, is the fact that they treated the announcement like he was diagnosed with some terminal illness. Like he's away from the team. Ja is getting some things right. He's away from the team, and we'll update you at a further time. And it took 2 or 3 days before anything was even coming to light on the fact that he's down in Florida for counseling. And then before that story was even really discussed over a 24 to 48-hour period, he's flying to New York to meet with Silver. And before you know it, he's back in. And Silver's releasing a statement saying he felt that he was honest and contrite with him across the table from him, which wasn't true. He said he taped the interview. He had Jalen Rose asking the questions on ESPN. and he's back in the playoffs, just in time for the playoffs with the Grizzlies. And then soon after, we see what happens as the next series begins without the Grizzlies a part of it. It's just a trend, and it's going to continue unless the NBA is able to actually find avenues to where you can actually get his attention. I don't know what those – I'm not pretending I know what those are. But, you've got everyone from Charles Barkley to Lil Wayne that are trying to reach out to him. Pac-Man Jones admitted with Pat McAfee that he tried to reach out to him. Pac-Man was suspended for a full season. Yeah. Had to get back with Goodell before he was allowed to even be traded to the Dallas Cowboys from Tennessee.
Yeah, had to be vetted by the commissioner.
And that involved a shooting out in a Vegas strip club where a guy was left paralyzed. Point being, it's not just the league. It is Morant. And yes, he's got to be willing to, accept that he wants to actually change. But the NBA can't just say, well, it's up to Ja if he wants to change. They have to make sure they give so many different areas of influence to him. And there's so many guys, even in the league now, former players that are saying the exact same thing, and they see it coming too.
But if they do all that and he does all of that and he still hasn't changed because he doesn't want to,
right,
at some point it's no longer on the NBA.
Right.
It is going to have to be on him. Alib in the YouTube chat.
But real quick, I can't. Let's say that happens after a 40-game suspension, and then Ja didn't want to change, but they let him back in, and then a month later something else happens. They have to make sure that because on the backside of what we saw from the last disciplinary action taken, we don't really know what he did and didn't do.
Yeah,
the NBA's got to make sure that they relay what he's doing or not doing, in order to make sure that we're not pointing to some light discipline or some look the other way mentality, which seems to be what has happened in the trend over the past year of nothing but report after report.
So Alib in the YouTube chat says, athletes get so much slack for acting like morons that the rest of us don't get, and then people want to sit here and suggest we're being too hard on them. Give me a break. The only difference is the spotlight on it. You do something stupid and you're a celebrity or an athlete to this extent, then everybody's going to talk about it, and not everyone's going to talk about the dumb stuff that we do. But I'll put this into context for those trying to cut slack on Ja Morant or make false equivalencies. If I got mad at Davey Hudson one day, and he got in his car and left the studio, and I had a laser pointer pointed on him in his car, and OutKick had to investigate that and find whether or not it was a real gun and a real laser, well, it was a fake laser pointer, and I was just trying to intimidate him, and then I got written up for doing that, and everyone knew about it in the company, and then I went to a strip club flashing the same gun, when I'm on a company retreat, then I'm not
and there's a policy in place.
Yeah. Fox and OutKick don't care at that point. They're not going to send me to rehab. They're going to fire me. That's how most everyone is going to be treated in that situation.
Mm-hmm.
So do not accuse us of going too hard at Ja Morant. This is the way the real world would treat you in your job, wherever you're watching from right now, whatever you're doing. That's how you're going to get treated in this situation. This is not a one-time thing. This is not he's a legal gun owner and he's got a carry permit and he can do what he... No, this is a culmination of events that has led to this, that anyone else is probably getting fired from their job and not some option of, you know what, we're going to pay for you to go on a retreat and get right, and then you're going to come back and we're not going to care about it at all anymore. No, this is, again, I'm not even counting 2 other strikes, and this is already 3 strikes with guns against Ja Morant. So the league is well within their rights to lay the hammer on him, but also, if you don't want to look like a hypocrite, make sure he's doing something to help himself during that time.
And from the first discussion we had on this, I said, I want to make sure this guy doesn't end up in prison or dead. And since then, Stephen A. Smith has said the same thing. Shannon Sharp is saying the same thing. I'm with them. And Barkley and others, they're all voicing their opinion, and they're backing not just the NBA policy, but whatever's headed his way suspension-wise. But what they're also agreeing to is there's more to this and the path that he's on, the trend that he's on. Skip Bayless with the segment with Lil Wayne, he's saying, like, I hope Ja Morant doesn't turn out to be one of those people you just can't save. But what I can't sit here and say is the NBA doesn't have a part in that for a 23-year-old that currently remains an active player in the league. And they let him back into the league even after the previous 2 times. So I do want to see what they lay out in detail instead of just some, he's getting treatment, guys. He'll rejoin the team when he's ready. It's got to be more than that. And for the first time, maybe in a while, we see a lot of current and former players that agree with the overall sentiment of the policies in place and the fact that we continue to see it from one individual. And I'm also not here saying that the other players don't have guns on them. They're admitting on social media that they're just not flaunting it. They're not putting it out there. And there are comments on that, too, as to why you wouldn't want to do that.
This is not an anti-gun stance. This is an anti-being an idiot with a gun stance, especially when you've had other gun-related problems as a player in the league. That's what we're talking about here.